The P-3 was named after the Orion constellation. In Greek mythology, he was known as the Hunter. Good morning, my name is Don Robertson. I plan to present information on the P-3 and its missions. All pilots and naval flight officers begin their training at Naval Air Station Pensacola. My class was commissioned in August 1970. I'm on the top row at the far right. Originally, I wanted to fly in the F-4 or A-6, however, I was too tall and started training in the P-3 Orion. I served from 1970 to 1995, 8 years on active duty and 17 years in the reserves. I was a navigator, tactical coordinator, and mission commander with VP-6 at Barbers Point, Hawaii, VP-31 and VP-91 at Moffett Field, and with VP-94 at Naval Air Station New Orleans. In my civilian career with Lockheed, I was a senior engineering instructor for 15 years training officers and enlisted personnel on destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and submarines on the operation of the Tomahawk and Harpoon cruise missiles. With the advent of the Tomahawk and Harpoon missiles, the Navy needed better over-the-horizon detection and identification capabilities. Outlaw Hawk was the Navy's program to use the U-2, landing and taking off carriers. Eventually, the program was better suited for the submarine community, as the U-2 was too large for carrier ops. The Outlaw Shark program was designed to receive location reports from numerous systems, and use computers to correlate the reports into one track. Tracking algorithms would estimate location and probability areas for over-the-horizon contacts. VP-6, home-based at Barbers Point, and VP-91, home-based at Moffett Field, operated at these bases throughout the North Pacific, South Pacific, and Indian Oceans. VP-94 was home-ported in New Orleans and operated at these bases in the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, the Gulf of Mexico, Mediterranean Sea, and the West Coast as far as Hawaii. The first operational tasking of the P-3 was in response to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The Orion provided location, course and speed, and photos of the missiles on deck of the Soviet cargo ships. A turboprop is a type of jet engine. All jet engines use a mixture of combusted fuel and air to produce exhaust. The main difference is how that exhaust is used. In a turboprop, the exhaust powers a propeller to generate thrust. In a standard jet engine, the exhaust gas is used to generate thrust. The Navy required immediate engine response and efficiency. Only a turboprop would do the job. The P-3 Orion was based on the Lockheed Electra L-188. The length of the P-3 fuselage was shortened by 7 feet. This resulted in a remarkable weight reduction. All ASW systems and other equipment could easily be installed in the remaining cabin. A weapons bay was added to the forward fuselage, as was the APU. The Electra's excellent view from the flight deck was improved for the Orion, by replacing the 7 windows with 5 larger ones. The passenger cabin windows disappeared, instead 4 large observer windows were installed. A bladder fuel tank was added between the wings. The Orion's nose radome is a bit more pointed, and the last major difference is the magnetic anomaly detector that required some design changes to the tail section. The Electra had a terrible reputation after several crashes. It took a long time for the problem to be determined. The prop rotation would create a destructive resonance, causing the wing to break off. The Orion wing was beefed up with 1,400 pounds of additional spars. 5 engine mounts instead of 2, larger engine covers, and stronger metal in the wings. A propeller has gyroscopic tendencies. In other words, it will stay in a smooth plane of rotation unless it is displaced by some strong external force, just as a spinning top can be made to wobble if a finger is placed firmly against it. The moment such a force is applied to a propeller, it reacts in the opposite direction. The result, if the mode is not checked, is a wildly wobbling gyroscope that eventually begins to transmit its violent motion to a natural outlet, the wing.
And just as I looked out the window, the engine went. As the prop came off, I thought, oh crap, it's going to kill me. It's going to cut me in two. But it flew forward, and then it came back and slapped the engine, and then went underneath.
The prop tears a hole in the bottom of the plane. The gash in the fuselage has caused an explosive decompression.
At the height of the Cold War, there were 12 P-3 squadrons on each coast, consisting of 12 crews and 9 aircraft per squadron. Each squadron would deploy to many distant bases, ensuring worldwide coverage, along with other countries supporting our operations. All crews had to be fully qualified in order to prosecute Soviet subs, including reserve crews. The first reserve crew to be fully qualified in the P-3B mod was my crew in Patrol Squadron 91. Several pilots and NFOs celebrated our 50th reunion in Pensacola in 2019. The aircraft behind us was one that we have flown all those years ago in Hawaii. The pilot, co-pilot and flight engineer were in the cockpit. In the forward port station was the radio operator. The radar, MAD, ESM, navigator, tactical coordinator, and acoustic operator stations on the P-3A, B, and B mod were all together in the center of the aircraft, affectionately known as the tube. The P-3A was the original Orion, based on the Electra airframe. It was state-of-the-art as far as airframes go, but the systems were taken from the P-2 and P-5M, using gear-driven displays, vacuum tube electronics, and old navigation systems. The P-3B was updated with more powerful engines, heavier landing gear, and a fuel dump capability. The P-3B mod was updated with an Omega navigation system, a Lytton 72 inertial navigation system, better displays, automatic inputs from acoustic and non-acoustic sensors, and a 32K digital computer. It greatly relieved the tactical crew from archaic manual logging and plotting. With the experience of reserve crews, operational performance was significantly improved. The P-3C changed the location of the tactical crew by compartmentalizing crew members and using computer inputs to replace the natural tendency of humans to communicate face-to-face. The P-3C had better electronics, however, the crew was separated, and, in my opinion, less effective. The new Boeing P-8 has gone back to the crew being together, side by side, in the tube. On February 8, 1971, an Orion took off from Naval Air Station Atugi, Japan and flew 7,010 statute miles non-stop to Patuxent River, Maryland. The flight lasted 15 hours 21 minutes. On another flight, the same crew reached an altitude of 45,018 feet and established a record 501 miles per hour. A New Zealand crew recorded the longest airborne flight time of over 21 hours. An exclusive economic zone is an area of the sea in which a sovereign state has special rights regarding the exploration and use of marine resources, including energy production from water and wind. All maritime nations have a tremendous interest in patrolling their exclusive economic zone. Oil exploration and drilling, mining, and fisheries are extremely important activities that take place in the exclusive economic zones. Many nations rely heavily on the oceans to feed their population. Maritime patrols ensure that their fishing rights are protected at sea, such as this Japanese fishing fleet.
Harmony of the seas. This is patrol aircraft conducting some patrolling on Mediterranean Sea. We are conducting some exercise and request permission to overfly your station at your right side, ma'am.
Covert operations require parachute insertion of special forces far from land, and the P-3 is ideally suited for this mission. Adversarial naval assets are of the utmost interest to the U.S. Navy. This is a Russian nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser of the Kirov class. There is only one left in their fleet since they were so expensive to maintain and operate. This is an Echo II, a nuclear-powered guided missile submarine, designed to attack aircraft carriers. It carried 8 missiles, but it had to surface to do so. Once surfaced, the missiles would elevate to fire, and the sub was vulnerable to attack. Notice the shadow of a P-3 over a sub-tender, and a Foxtrot submarine, somewhere in the Indian Ocean. The Soviets would often maintain a flotilla in the Bay of Bengal and near Socotra. It is probable that this Foxtrot submarine was one that we tracked somewhere in the Pacific. It was on display, next to the Queen Mary in Long Beach Harbor when I visited in 2013. Soviet spy vessels were especially active near friendly harbors, and carrier battle groups. There are numerous antennas all over the ship exploiting U.S. electronic emissions. The Bear is anything but stealthy, and could not survive against modern air and surface-launched, anti-aircraft missiles. However, a Bear launching cruise missiles must be intercepted anytime they pose a threat to U.S. forces. The location, course and speed, and intentions of Soviet combatants were important information that needed to be broadcast to the fleet. Naval decorum, protocol, and history are being observed by this Soviet submarine crew as we fly past them. This is what Fiery Cross Island looked like as we flew close to it in the early 1970s. Most of these islands look so low that a wave could wash across it at any moment. This is Fiery Cross Island today with a long runway, radars, deepwater harbor, barracks, missiles, and other military and naval facilities. The Chinese have illegally built numerous naval and submarine bases throughout the South China Sea. Many think this will lead to serious hostilities and even World War III. Operation Market Time was designed to detect any and all ships coming from North Vietnam infiltrating arms, ammunition, and personnel to South Vietnam. Once detected, identification and position were relayed to surface ships to eliminate the threat. The Northern Pacific, 1,000 miles northwest of Midway Island, is about as isolated a place as there is on the planet. It was a good place for a warhead to come crashing down into the sea. In an attempt to gather intelligence on their technology, the Navy and the Air Force would send out numerous aircraft, each with a specific purpose. Many of the aircraft would operate out of Midway Island. The operation was called Pony Express. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union would test their ballistic missiles and dummy warheads by launching them into the northern Pacific. Multiple telemetry ships would be positioned near the intended impact point. They would issue a message, warning all sailors and aviators to stand clear of the area during the window of time that the warheads would reach their target. Midway is a beautiful island located approximately 1,300 miles from Honolulu. Travel time for a P-3 is a little less than 4 hours. It is often used for navigation training from Moffett Field or Barbers Point squadrons flying to and from the Western Pacific. When the Soviets tested their ICBMs, Midway was busy with Coast Guard, Navy, Air Force, and other civilian assets. Goonie birds are everywhere on Midway Island, and are very dangerous when taking off or landing aircraft, particularly jet aircraft, due to engine ingestion. The P-3, with its large propellers, makes mincemeat of the poor Goonies, and little if any damage to the aircraft, other than blood and guts on the props and fuselage. On January 2022, the violent eruption of the Tonga volcano in the South Pacific shook the world. This was the largest eruption for nearly 1.5 centuries, since Indonesia's cataclysmic explosion of Krakatoa in 1883. All communications ceased, and no knowledge of the devastation was available, until P-3 and P-8 aircraft arrived to witness the devastation. New Zealand launched their Orions shortly after the eruption, as did Australia with their Poseidons, to assist with emergency supplies to the islands. Search and rescue kits can be deployed from the bomb bay or from the main cabin door. A few older P-3 airframes have been converted to drop water and fire retardant chemicals on raging forest fires in California and other fire-prone areas. Shipping in the higher latitudes is vulnerable to icebergs, consequently, many nations patrol their area for those hazards. Other airframes have been converted to search for illegal drug activity, particularly in the Caribbean and the West Coast, using large radar domes designed to look downward. Commercial airliners are designed to allow the wings to bend, which provides a comfortable ride for the customers. The P-3 has additional engine mounts, wing spars, and wing enhancements which provide for a rough ride, since the wings bend very little and any turbulence is passed directly to the fuselage. This makes penetrating into a hurricane an interesting, and sometimes very dangerous flight. However, the important data sent back gives advance warning to emergency planning centers, and saves lives and property. The suspected crash area for MH370 was very far from Western Australia. The long-range P-3 was the ideal aircraft to search large areas so far from land. With the ability to shut down 1 or 2 engines, the maximum endurance allowed crews to search wide swaths of the Indian Ocean. When an Orion burns off enough fuel, the crew can safely feather an engine and extend time on station. The engine is restarted on the return to base. As even more fuel is used, 2 engines can be safely feathered for even more extended time on station. During nominal 4-engine operation, an Orion can stay aloft for approximately 12 hours. By shutting down 1 engine at 15,000 feet, an Orion can fly for approximately 15 hours, and approximately 17 hours with 2 engines feathered. The mysterious disappearance of MH370 has created many theories, some logical, others are extreme. This 37-page report, in my opinion, is the most comprehensive, detailed, and scientific analysis of the event. The bomb bay has a total of 8 stations that can carry torpedoes, conventional bombs, depth bombs, and search and rescue kits. There are a total of 10 wing stations that carry mines, depth bombs, and missiles. During World War II, the Nazis designed Wolfpack tactics in the middle of the Atlantic. They referred to this time as the happy times because there was no air protection for convoys in the middle of the Atlantic.
Air escort to Greyhound. You will now be out of range of air cover for the next 5 days. Safe travels to England.
We have hits directly on the convoy.
The Wolfpack's haunting us.
U-boat, starboard bound!
In 48 hours, we've lost 7 ships. 50 souls.
The U-505 is flying the American flag after its capture in 1942 with the Enigma machine and codes. Once long-range aircraft were able to reach those areas, the happy times were over. And more convoys succeeded in crossing the Atlantic. The movie, The Hunt for Red October, was based on the Typhoon submarine. It was designed to sit on the ocean floor for up to 1 year with 150 men. When ordered, it would break through the ice to launch missiles, and is very difficult to find under the ice. It was 2 football fields long and is 75 feet wide. The submarine carried 20 intercontinental, 3-stage, solid propellant ballistic missiles, capable of holding 100 kilotons of nuclear warheads each. The reason the Typhoon was so huge is that the missiles were far less advanced and miniaturized than U.S. missiles. This is only one of the 20 missiles on board the Typhoon with 10 MIRV warheads on each missile. Several sensors help find them, such as satellites, high-frequency direction finding systems, and SOSUS. This is a satellite photo of a Russian subbase on the Kola Peninsula. As we zoom in, 2 Typhoon subs are seen with their missile bays exposed. The Sound Surveillance System, SOSUS, was a passive sonar system developed by the United States Navy to track Soviet submarines. The system's true nature was classified with the name and acronym, SOSUS, themselves top secret. The unclassified name, Project Caesar, was used to cover the installation of the system, and a cover story developed regarding the shore stations, identified only as a naval facility, being used for oceanographic research. The system was capable of oceanic surveillance with the long ranges made possible by exploiting the deep sound channel. As data is analyzed, a large area is developed using range and bearing. P-3s are then tasked with searching the SOSUS probability area or SPA. Over time, detection, localization, and tracking of the submarine is commenced. 1968 was a very bad year. The USS Scorpion sunk near the Azores, its position determined by SOSUS. The USS Pueblo was captured by North Korea, with top-secret crypto on board. Johnny Walker begins selling crypto codes to the Soviets, that compromises all of SOSUS hydrophone locations. The Soviet submarines now change tactics to evade detection. And the Soviets greatly quiet their new subs, making them much harder to detect. The radar is designed for small objects such as snorkels. ESM, or electronic support measures, is passive and designed to detect radars and other emitters. FLIR, or forward-looking infrared, detects heat signatures and displays either white-hot or black-hot. Sniffer was a sensor designed to detect hydrocarbon emissions from diesel submarines. The searchlight was an extremely bright 7 million candle power light on the starboard wing. When a crew arrives on station, the first buoy deployed discovers the layer depth. The layer depth is important since the sub will use it to minimize its detection. Omnidirectional buoys start the search, and as soon as the sub is detected, directional buoys are deployed to refine the target's position. Active buoys are then used to determine range from the buoy. The magnetic anomaly detector, the MAD boom, is also called the stinger. It has to be away from the main fuselage so that there is no Ferris interference. When the aircraft flies over a large metal object, such as a submarine, the operator will see a rapid needle swing on a display. The detection range is about 800 feet, so the aircraft has to fly very low for detection. A Navy P-3, equipped to detect magnetic anomalies usually associated with submarines, found the wreck on November 14, 1975. The Edmund Fitzgerald lay in Canadian waters close to the international boundary, at a depth of 530 feet. Orions usually work at low altitudes over salt water. After those flights, the aircraft goes through a freshwater wash, affectionately known as the bird bath, to remove sea salt deposits that are very corrosive and costly. On April 1, 2001, a Chinese J-8D fighter jet collided with the US P-3 reconnaissance aircraft flying near Chinese airspace, about 70 miles south of China. The EP-3 crew was forced to make an emergency landing on China's Hainan Island, according to Chinese officials. The pilot of the J-8D, Wang Wei, ejected, but he was never found and is presumed dead. The collision occurred at 22,000 feet and 180 knots. After the third pass, the J-8 hit the number 1 prop. It was destroyed and took out the ray dome, causing the aircraft to invert and drop to 8,000 feet before the pilot recovered the aircraft. The crew of 24 Americans was eventually allowed to return home on 11th of April. The American aircraft was not returned for another 3 months. American reconnaissance crews had been intercepted many times before, in some instances the interceptors flying as close as 10 meters from the American surveillance aircraft.
That's too close. I agree.
He's very, very close.
Oh, yeah.
He's almost probably 20 feet from our wingtip.
On May 12, 1971, a VP-6P-3A crashed shortly after takeoff from NASQB Point. All 4 engines had failed because cleaning fluid had been mistakenly substituted for water injection fluid. With 4 engines on fire, the pilot successfully ditched the aircraft in Subic Bay without electrical or hydraulic power. 15 out of 16 crewmen survived with few injuries. However, the navigator was killed when the bladder tank broke through the floor. On April 18, 1980, an ill-fated P-3 banked to the right, just before it crashed into Pago Pago's Rainmaker Hotel. It struck a tramway cable and severed the vertical stabilizer, causing total loss of control. 6 Navy crewmen were killed, as were 2 civilians on the ground. The crash occurred after the plane dropped a group of skydivers during American Samoa's Flag Day celebration. Alpha Foxtrot 586 was a P-3 on a sensitive Cold War mission, off the Kamchatka Peninsula on October 26, 1978. When a propeller malfunction turned into an engine fire, the pilot was forced to ditch his aircraft into the freezing seas west of the Aleutian Islands. Less than a minute after Alpha Foxtrot 586 reported its position, it ditched into the North Pacific, in extremely menacing conditions. The aircraft went down in just 90 seconds, taking one of the 3 rafts with it. 13 men launched the other rafts, the smallest of which, terribly overcrowded, soon began to leak, threatening the 9 men aboard. A Coast Guard C-130, an Air Force RC-135, and a Navy P-3, directed a Soviet fishing vessel to the crash site, and rescued the survivors, after surviving more than 10 hours in the frigid water. The 10 survivors were moved to the Russian port of Petropavlovsk, flown to a hospital, transferred to Japan, and from there returned to Moffett Field, arriving on November 4, 1978. This is the fishing vessel that changed course to save the crew of AF 586. It had been out to sea almost a year and was returning to Petropavlovsk with their haul of fish. The crew of Alpha Foxtrot 586 was honored at a ceremony at their home base of Moffett Field, California. The calm and professional Mayday call was broadcast by Tactical Coordinator Matt Gibbons on the lower left. Captain Larry Getzford was the most senior officer killed at the Pentagon on 9/11. He was my navigator for 1 year in Patrol Squadron 6, and we also served together in the P-3 Training Squadron. His brick is in the Sun City Veterans Memorial Plaza.